a good quorum of people who have arrived, so I'm going to get started. You should be able to hear me now, I hope. Anyway, as said, hi, I'm Mark Pizzella from the Sahana Software Foundation. The Sahana Software Foundation, as many of you I hope know, is a nonprofit organization. We develop free and open source software around disaster management solutions. And have been working in this area since the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004. And our software is now used by a very large group of humanitarian organizations. Today's training is the first ever of our virtual Sahana Eden training for new developers. It's designed for new contributors to Sahana Eden. And our goal is to show you how to get started coding and contributing to our software project. We've tied this event to support several projects that are going on. There is a New York City prepared effort that is launching based on Sahana Eden, being organized by Devin Balkan of Serapis, which is a continuation of the work we did with Occupy Sandy here in New York City, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Also, this coming weekend is the Great Copper Open Source Day Codathon, where people attending that conference come and work on an open source project for about the better part of the day, and that's coming up this Saturday. So hopefully some of the participants or people who indicated they might be interested in working with Sahana Eden this coming weekend are here as well. As I've mentioned a couple of times, just a simple ground rule for the training. Please keep your voice muted. I don't know if you have the ability to unmute yourself after I've muted you, but I'll be trying to keep things quiet during the training portion of this where we're providing instructions. If you have questions about what we are, the training that's being provided or the information, please type them into the chat window, and we've planned breaks for review of the questions that we'll take in the middle of the training, and we also have a decently large section at the end of time that we can answer your questions. All of the training materials we're using today are already posted on our website at sahanafoundation.org/program/training. All of these slides, and we will also be including recorded video and audio of the training as well. That'll be up hopefully sometime tomorrow. So with that, I'd just like to introduce our facilitator, Michael Houghton. He's the director of the Sahana Software Foundation, one of our leading Sahana developers, and the managing director of 8IQ, which is a company that provides services around Sahana Eden-based solutions. So with that, I will attempt to hand over to Michael, who will take us through the rest of the training. Michael, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Okay, I'm going to hand over control to you in just a second, and you can take us through the rest of the program. There you go.
Okay, with any luck, you should be seeing my desktop and hopefully a fairly fluid transition from the slides that Mark was just looking at.
Yep.
So Mark, can you see the slides?
Yeah.
Excellent. So welcome everyone, and thank you all for coming to this training. So just to go through some of our goals for this training. So after this training, you'll be able to install Sahana Eden on your own machine to start developing in it. You'll be able to start coding in Sahana Eden. You'll hopefully learn how to share your code with Git, and also, most importantly, probably find more resources about Sahana Eden, and I hope know how to stay in touch with the Sahana Eden community. This is, as Mike said, the first time we've been doing this training, so we've really tried to pitch it in the sort of middle. I'm sure some of you on this call are Python experts, and there'll also be some real beginners on this call as well. And we're hoping that we've managed to get a wide enough range that it will meet everyone's needs. I think one of the important things I would emphasize is this is an overview, and we're not expecting you to come away as experts, but we will expect you to know where to find the information to become experts. Some of you may want to follow along. We're going to be going a bit more quickly than we'd intend to have people following along. So we're not going to be pausing and with intending to people follow along. So just to let you know that. But what I hope is that this will give you the introduction and you'll be able to go through these slides and some of the other material in your own time at a more leisurely pace. But we'll really give you the introduction. And finally, as Mike said, this is the first time, so any feedback you have at the end, we'll be doing an evaluation and will be most appreciated. So just a brief overview. We're going to go through an introduction to Sahana Eden. We're going to talk about some of the deployments and how it's used. We'll talk about how to get started, how to install Sahana Eden on your own machine. We'll go through a basic tutorial of building a new module, and I'll show you some of this. And then we'll look at some of the files of Sahana Eden and how URLs and that. Finally, we'll look at some customization, so how you can customize Sahana Eden, different options there. And then we'll look at the S3 API. So this is Sahana version 3. This is the sort of framework that Sahana Eden is built on, and just quickly go over some of these functions there. Looking at options for moving forward, how you can get involved, and finally, hopefully opening up to at least 30 minutes of Q&A, but we'll have questions throughout. So at the end of each section, we'll have some time for some questions. So as Mark said, please type those in the chat window, and Mark will feed those questions back to me, and we'll answer those at the end. So yeah, as I said, either questions at the very end of the presentation or at the end of each section. So just a brief introduction to Sahana Eden. This is probably things all of you already know. It's an open source disaster management platform. We think of this as a framework for rapidly developing web applications for humanitarian, emergency management, and disaster management organizations and agencies. It automatically generates CRUD pages from the data model. Now, many of you will be familiar with CRUD, create, read, update, delete pages. Now we say plus because it also gives you reports, maps, and filters based on those data models. Behind the scenes is a very powerful RESTful API, so that enables a lot of functionality around web services. And it's really also quite a robust architecture. As I said, there's the mapping, filters, reporting features, but also integrated messaging, so integration between messaging from social media as well as SMS. We're going to just briefly go through a number of the recent deployments, one with the Red Cross, one for the UN, the Occupy Family work, which Mike mentioned before, and finally a project we're doing in Los Angeles with the County Department of Public Health there. So this is the resource management system, which was developed for the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Focused in the Asia Pacific, but it's now being rolled out globally. As you can see, it's powered by Sahana Eden. So all of these deployments I'm showing you are all built with Sahana Eden. And in fact, because of the templating system we use, all of these deployments, the code is in trunk. So you can download this code and look at this code yourself. This is being used across a range of different national societies, and it's being used to manage staff, volunteers, members, warehouses, assets, assessments, and projects. Just a write-up of that there. The next deployment I'm showing you is the Disaster Risk Management Information System. Not very innovative names that a lot of these organizations are coming up with, but some very innovative functionality that we're implementing for them. So the idea here was to implement a news feed, an interactive, user-friendly way of sharing situational awareness information between multiple stakeholders. So this is being used by multiple stakeholders in Timor-Leste, led by the United Nations Development Program, but also being used by the government there. That has the news feed for sharing situational awareness, but also taking that information and putting it on various profile pages. We also have the map functionality in this deployment, where we're taking risk and hazard assessment information and displaying it on a map along with information they're adding. And finally, this is using a responsive web design based on Bootstrap to make it usable on mobile devices. So the Sandy relief site was developed in response to the Hurricane Sandy in New York. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. It was used to manage relief goods after Hurricane Sandy, specifically request management for dispatch centers. Now this effort is transitioning into the New York City Prepared initiative that Mark mentioned earlier, and this will focus on having an organization directory and an inventory management. Finally, we're looking at the Sahana Community Resilience Mapping Tool. So Sahana is more than just a response. We're looking at how do we make communities more resilient with this project. We're taking a lot of data from the USGS and FEMA about hazards, along with US Census data. Combining that with data that members of communities can add themselves about places, people, hazards, and activities to help analyze all of the different aspects of resilience in a community. So this is really highlighting how Sahana can be used to bring different data sources together and visualize them in different ways. So you've heard a bit about how Sahana can be used. Let's talk about how you can start getting involved in this project. First of all, just a brief overview of the stack that we're using in Sahana. So the stack we have is that we typically use an Apache web server, although other servers can be used such as Cherokee. When we're doing local development, we just use the Rocket server that comes with Web2Py. The application is Sahana Eden, but this is built on top of a web application framework called Web2Py. Now, this was deliberately developed to make it really easy and quick to develop web applications, and that's the reason that we chose this as the foundation to build Sahana Eden on. The programming language is primarily Python, but of course, like any web application, there's a healthy dollop of JavaScript in there as well. The database is MySQL or Postgres or SQLite for local development instances. The operating system we recommend in all of our deployments are on is Linux, so we use the Amazon EC2 stack. It's possible to deploy on Windows or a Mac operating system, but we've really only used those for the local instances. I'm running mine on a Mac at the moment. For production deployments would really advise using Linux. But if people are wanting to use Windows, they can certainly work at that. But there's full documentation for production and deployments to Linux. So that's the general stack. But let's talk about how you can install Sahana Eden. So there's different flavors of installation. So either installing it as a developer where you'll be modifying the code yourself, or as an end user or production instance where you won't be. We're really going to focus on the developer installation in this training. So as I've mentioned, Sahana Eden can be deployed on a number of different environments. We'll go through some of these briefly. In terms of hosting, as I mentioned, we have the Amazon EC2 support, and we have scripts for deploying Sahana to Amazon EC2. But we're also investigating how to deploy it to Heroku, which some of you may be familiar with. That documentation we have on the wiki is a bit, it's still in beta phases. There's still a few issues with it. So if anyone's a Heroku guru and wants to help us get Sahana Eden deployed to Heroku, that would be a great way to contribute to the project. So I'm just going to go through some of these installation guidelines. And trying to type the URL right. So installation guidelines. So I'm just going to take you through a brief tour. Now we've tried to design this in somewhat of a wizard type approach. We're going to start with Windows. So as I said, we're focusing on the developer. So you've got a number of options here. So you can either use the installer package. Now that's going to install everything for you automatically. So that's a really handy option to have. If you maybe already have a lot of your own packages installed, you want some more control, you really want to see what's going on, maybe you want to follow through the manual installation guidelines. So installing Python and all of its packages, and then installing Git. And then once you've installed that, installing Web2Py. We use Git to install Web2Py. It's the easiest way to do that. We also use Git to install install Sahana Eden. So that's sort of just some basic installation guidelines, but that's really all you need to follow through. So we've got the same if we go back. Let's say you're running Linux. I'm sorry, just to show you with Windows. So the installer package can be downloaded here. It's just been updated. So if you're running Linux, once again, you've got an option of using a script or installing it manually. And finally, with all of our deployment, with all of the operating systems, we have also got a virtual machine image. So if you want to install VirtualBox, or if you have your own virtual machine, you can download this virtual machine image, and that comes with everything installed on an Ubuntu OS. So that's a really quick way to get started. But I do find sometimes it's a bit more restrictive and you're not working on your own machine. So I personally prefer to download it on my own operating system. But if you want to install on Linux, there's instructions to do it here manually. And then really there's just the same instructions after you've installed Linux, after you've installed the Python packages and get on all the different platforms. Same going through with the Mac operating system. We've really only got the manual instructions or the VirtualBox option here, but there's a lot of detailed instructions, so these should be relatively easy for you to follow. We've had a large number of people go through them, so and every now and then I'll have to reinstall Sahana on my own system, and I even go back to these instructions, and so they're pretty robust. But if you encounter any problems whatsoever through your installation, do get in touch with us and we'll talk about how you can get in touch with the Sahana Eden community. We're a really supportive bunch and really keen to help new people get involved. So, great. So, as I mentioned, the steps are, first of all, installing Python, installing the Python libraries that we needed for Sahana, installing Git, installing Web Supply, installing Sahana Eden, and then installing, optionally, the Eclipse IDE, the Eclipse Integrated Development Environment. Eclipse is an IDE that I use. You're more than welcome to use whatever development environment that you would like. Many people just like editing text files. That's the way they go. But if you're getting started and wanting to, I find Eclipse very useful for helping to explore the code. It has a number of features. So some of the standard features are the file explorer, looking at outlines of your code. But it also contains a debug mode, which allows you to trace through the code, to inspect expressions, and look at different variables. I find this is very powerful and useful for starting to understand code, seeing how different functions work, and seeing how they fit together. So that's potentially something you want to look at. So, as I said, it's got the file directory, the file outline. You can run and debug Sahana Eden and set breakpoints and then trace through your code either by stepping into functions, stepping over functions, returning from functions, or just resuming. So if you're interested or if you want to find out more, give it a go. Once again, all the instructions for installing it are there on the wiki. So just those should be relatively simple to follow through. So a couple of points around Sahana Eden. It's written in Python, so Python developers out there, you'll already know this, but some of you might not be so familiar with Python, but I think it's a relatively easy language to learn. I came from a background of C and a little bit of VB, and I've picked it up relatively easily, and if you've got experience with web applications, I think that's the key thing. But one of the things to note in Python is they don't use parentheses to delineate code blocks. So Python uses white spaces. So you'll see later on the indents. I can probably show you some of these now. Just looking at some of the code we have here. I'll come back to this later. Using indents to delineate code blocks. So that it's really important that these indents are consistent, and we do this with 4 spaces. So you need to configure your editor so that your tab is replaced with 4 spaces. So these are just something to look for in different types of editors to do this. So finally, after you've installed Sahana Eden, there's a few changes just to make to the config file, and you'll find that in models -000 underscore config.py. You'll have to set the variable finish editing config file to true. That's just to make sure that people have taken that config file and added any settings they need to locally. And then we'd recommend putting it into debug mode. This just makes sure you use non-minified CSS and JavaScript files. And it also means that your code changes will be visible when you're running it without having to restart Web2Py. So once you've done all that, you're good to start. So what you want to do is in your command prompt, go to the Web2Py main directory, and then you want to type, as it is here, you want to run Web2Py from Python. The -A1234 is an optional variable which gives you a local password, and that just bypasses a UE. And once you've done all that, you can go to this web address here. I'll just pull it up. And you can see the default page loading there. So this is the default template. It's in need of some love, so that's certainly something that if some of you are sort of user interface wizards or just handy with CSS and HTML, maybe that's something you want to look at. We don't use this for any other deployments at this stage, but it's certainly something that could be built on. So at this stage, I'd just like to stop and just see if there are any questions that anyone may have had.
We could probably go on. At the end, I'm going to have Kevin talk a little bit about my Superstars project. I think we should maybe wait until we get through this actual training to the end of the
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And if you do have any questions about the material that Michael's going over, feel free to type them in now, and we'll take them at these break points. So back to you, Michael.
Thank you, Mark. So the next thing I'd like to go through is how to build a new module in Sahana. So Sahana uses a modular architecture with different modules for things like organizations, inventory, projects, human resources, and so on. The slides I'm going through with you are just a brief summary of a chapter we've got in the Sahana Eden book. Now you'll see the link to that chapter is below in the slide. Hopefully, I should have mentioned, hopefully you'll have your own copy of the slides. I'm not sure if those have been shared on the link yet, but those will certainly be emailed to all of you at the end of this training, so you can go through in your own time and follow through to those links.
The slides are already posted. The slides are already posted on the website. Yep.
Or you can go now to the website and find those slides. So the module that we're going to be building is a training module. And inside that module, modules contain multiple resources. This is a terminology we use to refer to tables. So the resource, we're just going to look at a module with one resource in it, and that resource is going to be a course. So in that course, we're going to look at sort of 3 fields: what the name of that course is, when it starts, and the facilitator of that course. So to start with that, we're going to define a basic data model for this. So this is really simply done. We define the table name as training_course. Now we have the pattern we use in Sahana Eden is to have the have the module name, have the table name as module underscore resource. So here the name of the module is training, name of the resource is course, so the table name will be train underscore course. Then we define the table using the following syntax and define the 3 fields in it. Following that, we add on a controller. This is in the controller file, and this maps the URLs to codes and the resources. You'll see we're using the S3 REST controller, and that really is where a lot of the magic of Sahana Eden lies. So, you've heard me talking about it and showing you some pretty slides, but let's see how this actually works in action. So, here's one I prepared earlier. You'll see I'm using Eclipse here. You'll see File Explorer here. So we can look at the model here we defined, just exactly the same as it was in the slides, and also the controller. Really simple. I'm running Sahana from Eclipse already, so I'm just going to open up. Now we haven't added any menus. We're not going to go into that in today's training, but there's instructions on how to add menus in the book. So I'm just going to type this in the browser. So we're going to go to training course, and here we see our table. So we see a table with those three fields in it. I've added a bit of data here already. We can add a record here. So sorry, got that mixed up. Poor naming of so the training is Python. I'm the facilitator. We can save that. We'll save that there. We can see that record. We can see that in the list there. So that's how that works, and we've got a lot of that powerful functionality just from a few simple lines of code. Now, of course, this is a basic introduction. There's a lot more you can add to that, and we've got details of that in the book. So we saw that. So we said at the start this was CRUD plus. So you've seen the CRUD. Let's see the plus. Going into the URL again, I'm just going to go to report 2. This is we're in the process of migrating to a newer report framework, so this is the newer report framework. So here we can select, let's look at the number of records, and let's group that by the name and the facilitator. So we can now update that report, and we can start seeing these reports, but perhaps more interestingly, we can start looking at charts of all this data. So there's not a lot of data here at the moment. So this is not really showing us too much, but I'm sure you can see how potentially valuable this sort of analysis is. As I mentioned before, Sahana Eden has a RESTful API, and one of the other features of this is that it can export data in a number of different formats. So just by changing the extension in the URL, we can get an XL format downloaded. So we can see this data in Excel. We can see it in XML. And for those Ajax junkies out there, we can also export it into JSON. So all of this comes out of the box with Sahana's REST controller. So that's really a basic and a fairly quick overview to building a module in Sahana Eden. I'd really encourage you all to follow through those instructions in your own time, but hopefully this gives you a heads up on what to expect and what you're looking for. Are there any questions at this point?
At this point, I think we can move forward.
Great. So I just wanted to briefly talk about file and URL mapping, just to give you a sort of an overlay of how things work behind the scenes in Sahana Eden. So Sahana Eden uses an MVC framework, So that's model view controller. So the model, for those of you who aren't familiar, defines the data model. The view generates the page in HTML or other formats. And the controller does the work. It has the logic that puts the data together for the page. So in Sahana, even there's a few changes to this. Models tend to contain a bit more logic than typically. This is because within the framework, a lot of the code in the models can be reused. The controllers are also a bit more streamlined, partially because of the S3 REST controller. Let's go back to what we saw before. That does a lot of the work, a lot of the heavy lifting for you, so there's not much more you need to add. Finally, just a bit of detail about the views. The views use the curly bracket tags to insert Python and code and variables from the controller into the HTML and the views. So this is the syntax. If you're familiar with MVC frameworks, it'll probably be quite unfamiliar to you. So just briefly going over the file structure. So the models can live in two different places. You'll see we added it to the models directory before, and then they can operate there, but typically when we're going to development, going to deployment and production, we want to put them in the modules/S3DB directory. Now there's some clear advantages there. There's optimization advantages is basically the main one. So we only run the models that are needed for the specific HTTP request. So this is all about optimizing the performance. And it's just that there's a few more steps to put a model into that directory. So when we're going through these tutorials, we just teach people about adding it to the models directory. But if you're adding a new model, then yeah, we can help step you through the exact steps to that later. So the views and the controllers are in obvious directories. Now the S3 API is in the modules/S3 directory, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. If you're looking for the CSS or the JavaScript, they're in the under the static directory, and the templates are under private. We'll talk a bit more about those later. So to talk a bit more about the URL mapping. Now you would have seen me typing in some URLs before. And first of all, we'll start talking about how it works in Web Supply. So we have the application, the controller, and the function. The application is always going to be even. The controller here is default, this is the home page, and index. So that basically says go to the default controller, and inside the default controller, look for the index function. Now, similarly, this is mapped to the view, so we can look inside the views folder. There's the default subdirectory, and then the index HTML file there. So what the controller will do, it will generate the variables. It will do some processing of data, and it will pass that to the view for it to be rendered. So, getting more into Sahana Eden's URL mapping, we really take away this sort of control and we think more on a module level. So we have host, Eden, module, and resource. So thinking with each module, it has a model inside the S3DB directory, it has a view, and it has a controller. Now there might be additional views for each module. There will be at least one for the index page for that. So that without any if you're not defining anything else, this will go to the index page. So looking how that works with the example we're looking at. If we're looking at training course create, we can see here that the module is training, the resource is course, and we're just introducing this new concept of method as create. So the model that we're going to is training, and we're looking at the training course table. Inside the view, there's actually two options of where that could look for the view. In actual fact, most of the time it's looking just at the default create view. But you can override that default create view with a specific view for a specific resource method, and just using that syntax there, but typically we use the generic views. It just means that there's more consistency in the UI, and it just makes it easier. Now, you'll see the controller is relatively simple still, and in actual fact, the controller is the one that will handle all of the method. So, regardless of the method, it will still go to the same controller, and that controller will generate the correct view. So as I said before, you've got your custom views which you can have, but typically we just use the generic views. So moving one step forward, we're going to look at the update function. So same model, same module, same resource. Looking at the views, it's using the generic update views, and it's using the same controller. But the one extra thing you might see here is there's this 1 here after the resource name, and that's indicating which resource ID we're looking at. So here we're looking at resource ID 1. So looking at another module, we're looking at the org or organization module. Now this is used to manage organizations, offices, and so forth. Here, the key resource in this module is the organization, so we can look at having the org organization. So the module is org, the resource is organization, the table name is org_organization. We're using the default view for the create, and the controller is in the controller's org.py direct file. With organization, the controller is a bit more complicated, so there's a bit more than just the S3 controller. So that gives a really quite a broad, high-level overview of resource mapping. I hope that this has gone through in enough detail for you to follow it, but I'm sure that you'll go back and look at this and refer back to this as you're getting more engaged in Sahana Eden. At this stage, are there any questions that any of you may have?
All clear in the chat room.
All clear in the chat room. Feel free to type away anything. It's always nice to get some feedback as we're going through this. So we've given you a rundown on how to install your own, how to build your own module in Sahana Eden. In actual fact, really, and the majority of times, we hope that instead of having to build your own module, you'll be able to reuse some of the existing modules in Sahana Eden. And one of the great things in Sahana Eden is the templating functionality. Now, there have been a lot of debates of how things need to be configured, and because disaster management is such a broad field with so many diverse organizations and users, it's often hard to get consensus on what the right approach is. Also, different organizations have different needs. So to resolve this, we've come up with a templating structure which allows us to have deployment-specific templates. All of these customizations can be isolated in trunk, but still remain in trunk, which makes it much easier. Before we have the templating system, we'd have to manage multiple repositories of Sahana Eden for different deployments, and needless to say, it was somewhat of a challenge. So a template consists of a number of different files in the templating directory. First of all, there's the need to create a template folder with the name of your template. Then the main configuration file. You can configure your pre-populate, which we'll talk a bit more about later. You can configure which CSS and which views you look at, as well as the layouts. Now, this really enables you to create some really quite unique solutions out of Sahana Eden just by modifying these files, creating really different unique looks and feels. And of course, you can have custom controllers and custom menus. So the template is set in the configuration file, the models-00config.py. Just by, there's a line that says setting base template equals default. Naturally, the default template is default, but you can change this to any template you like. So to customize resources, we can do this easily in the config file in a template by adding a function which says customize organization, for instance, and then adding a setting that will run that customization for that resource. So, for example, we might want to edit a field. So let's say that the label for year used to be year, but we want to change it to year founded. So we can do that by adding this code. Once again, here's one I prepared earlier. So, get to the right file. The template I'm showing here is called a training. We set this 00 config to use the training template here. Here's the training template config file. And you'll see I've added this already. So year founded, just explicitly say this is AD. We can save that, and then we can go to our add organization. And now I'm just making sure I've got the right config file. Now, so I updated the comments here. I needed to update the label. Always sketchy doing live changes in a training. So you can see that the label's been updated here, as well as the comment there. But maybe we decide that we don't actually want that field anymore. So just a quick rundown. What we've done here is we've looked at the table, we've looked at the year field in that table, and we changed the label and the comment here. Some of the syntax is with applied, so we won't go into too much detail, but the div is creating HTML tags, and the tooltip is just activating some of the JavaScript that shows this as a tooltip. But let's say we don't want to see that field anymore. So all we have to do is set readable to false and writable to false. And the field's gone. So we can easily simplify forms like that. So once again, that example there. Adding a new field is somewhat more difficult. Unfortunately, we can't add fields in the template yet. So we do need to go into the original model to do this. So for organizations, as we discussed, because this is one of the systems models, it's in the modules s3db.org file. And we'll just open that up there. And what we'll do is we'll just add a field for Facebook. So this is the Facebook page. Save that. Go back and we can look at this organization form again. And we can see we've now got a field for the Facebook page. So you can see it's very easy to add fields. And what I always say, however, it's easy to add fields, but it's hard to take them away. Once people are used to a field, it's very hard to take it away from them. And sometimes this results in forms that contain hundreds, well not hundreds, but close to 100 fields, which affects usability quite considerably. So we need to be mindful of how many fields we add and make sure they're all adding value. So when you're adding fields to existing models and existing resources, there will often need to be some discussion within the community to make sure those fields are going to be valuable. But if you want to add fields to your own models, that's absolutely fine to go ahead and do. So we've gone through some basic customizations of Sahana EM there. Are there any questions or anything that anyone would like me to cover in more detail, or perhaps questions about how they think they might like to customize Sahana EM?
Yes, Michael, we have our first, an excellent question, which is how do we manage multiple languages?
Excellent question. Okay, so thank you for actually mentioning that, and I should have actually mentioned that when Some of you may have noticed this T in front of some of the strings that we've put here. So that's a flag for internationalization. So any string in that T will be added to the languages file. And we are able to export either a PO, if you're familiar with Poodle, or a CSV file of all of the strings within Sahana Eden. And so we can even do that in Excel format, and those can go to translators who can then translate those. We already have a number of translations in a number of different languages, so there is some support for that. But if you're doing your own custom deployment, you'll often find there's new strings that need to be deployed. But then we can either, through the configuration settings, we can set the language, or you can be provided with menu options to set the language or to select the language based on the user's language settings. Does that answer the question? Hopefully. Mark, do you have any other questions?
That's it right now.
Great. I'll keep on going. Oh. Sorry. Jumping over the place a bit here. So I'd just like to talk a bit briefly about the S3 API. So S3 stands for Sahana version 3, and there were a number of versions of Sahana before Sahana Eden came along. And for some of you who are familiar with the history, initially Sahana Eden was known as Sahana Pi. So S3 API is a powerful framework feature, and we've already seen the REST controller in action. But it's also got a RESTful API that enables URL formatted queries and HTTP methods. And this really opens up a lot of possibilities for web services. The S3 XML format is also a custom XML format we have within the framework. And what's special about this is it can be transformed with XSLT into various different XML formats. So we enable to support a lot of the open data standards, as well as exporting and importing into CSV files. That's the way that we import a lot of our data. So I'm really only just making you aware of this. For those of you who are really interested in this, these are the links to follow, and you can explore these links in more detail. So I talked about web services. So one thing that's worth mentioning that we've realized within the Sahana Software Foundation is that there's never going to be one software solution that solves everything in disaster management. The field is so broad and so variable. It involves so many different stakeholders and so many different needs. There's always going to be a multitude of different software solutions. So what we've really focused on is making sure that we can integrate with a lot of different software solutions. So we've chosen a web services architecture to support this. So for some of you, you'll be very familiar with this. For others, and this may be new, so the idea that another system can export data in XML, JSON, or even CSV. We can transform that into our own S3 XML format, and that's all done internally with an XSLT file. We can then store that in our database, but then have our own data which we export into S3 XML, transform that into any other format, and then that can be imported into another system. Or more often than not, it's into an Excel spreadsheet, which people then digest the data that way. We have imported a lot of data from Excel using this format. Just a brief aside, my background, I started working in the disaster management field in Indonesia after tsunami almost coming up 10 years ago now, actually. As I was there, I realized that the entire humanitarian system is based on Excel spreadsheets. So one of the goals I have with Sahana is to give people a better tool in Excel for managing their information. So some of the other features in the framework I mentioned before is filters. Now we've got a really flexible model with our filter form that can be added to tables, to maps, and to reports to filter any of those. I showed you the pivot table reports before, and that's a link to follow to learn how to configure your own. And finally, maps. A map says 1,000 words. So to map any resource, all we need to do is add a GIS location to it. Location ID field to it. And that stores the latitude, longitude, as well as information about the address and administrative area. Then we can use the map method to map a single resource, as well as viewing all resources by going to the GIS module. As well as mapping our own resources, we can import geodata layers in KML, WMS, and WFS formats. But for more information, have a look at the developer guidelines here. I talked briefly about pre-populate before. So pre-populate is a way of pre-populating Sahana Eden's database with data from CSV files. So this is really useful when you're doing development and you want to have some dummy data in there. It's also really useful for deploying and to import existing data. So the pre-populate is customizable for templates and it's configurable in the class.cfg file. Also, you may find you're running Sahana Eden and you want to re-pre-populate. Maybe you've changed to looking at a different template and you want to pre-populate the data for that template. So to do that, all you need to do is wipe the database. Now, if you're using SQLite, all you need to do is wipe the database file, database folder. So that's Eden/databases. So delete all the contents of that, and that will clear your database. So don't do this on a production server. Perhaps I need to add that warning here. But you shouldn't be running SQLite on a production server. And then when Sahana Eden detects, when it runs and detects an empty database, it will pre-populate again. So for more detailed instructions, that's the page to go to on the wiki, and it's got detailed instructions on how to do that there. So finally, with the framework, I'm looking at the authorization, and here we have customizable roles and permissions. These can be customized both from the user interface at the frontier, or by looking at the pre-populate. And there's a line in the task.cfg file that you can use there, and you can maybe look at some of the other examples of how it's done. Authorization is complicated because there's a lot of complicated needs, and we've really built a system that's incredibly flexible. Unfortunately, that can mean that some of our deployments have some very, very complicated authorization setups. However, we do have testing routines to test that those are working. So we can configure authorization by module, table, controller, and also by organization and hierarchy such as office or branch. This enables users from a particular organization to only have access to their organization's data. Finally, the authorization can support record approval. So this allows some users to be able to just add data, and that data is not visible until administrator users or other users have been able to approve that. So once again, this is just a very brief overview, and for more information, this is a link to go to on the wiki. So that's the overview of the framework. Now, there are many other features in the framework. I've just tried to choose a few of the main ones to give you a brief introduction. There were links to see everything involved. Are there any questions at this point in time before we move on? Mark?
Trying to read here. How do you make relations between tables using CRUD? For example, how would you CRUD plus to define a table's relation between a shelter and a person?
Great question. I took that slide out. So I think we're a bit ahead of schedule, so I'm going to dance around and bring up that presentation. So just to show you that. Sorry. Actually, just bear with me. So we have something we call components. So it allows you to have components, but also you can add key IDs.
for programs, training, not on applications anymore. Sorry. Programs, virtual training, and then the advanced training. Sorry.
So, thanks for the question. So, links to other resources. So, you would have seen, I just got this as well. You would have seen what we did before is we had just a facilitator field, but what ideally we'd do here is would use a person ID, and that would link to a person. So we can also have like organization IDs, so that will link to an organization. We can have office IDs, and those are all things that we can do. So that's the quick answer. Possibly don't need the slide for that. And as you can see here in the slide, once you've added that field, the widget changes. So this is actually using an autocomplete widget that looks up from the list of people. The component model I was talking about, I'm just going to skip through, and we'll provide a link to these slides as well. So this is showing a link to sites, so different locations. And we can also have components, so we can have participants in a course. So we can have a linking table that links training courses of people who participate. So we can define that training participant table. It links to the course, it links to the person, and then we just add a component. So that's just really basic. And this is all detailed, covered in the tutorial in the book. So once again, promoting that book, really, that is a great place to go. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay, if there's no other question, I will keep going and keep talking about Git and Git.
Sorry, one more question. Michael.
Oh, yes, right.
One more question. Do you have deployment with task management? Do you use Gantt charts to represent planning?
Yes and no. So I'm not sure if I mentioned projects, but we use Sahana to track projects as well. One deployment which I haven't mentioned, it's one of our first ones is the DRR project portal. I could just add the link to that, drprojects.net, if you put that in the chat. And that is looking at projects. That is not actually looking at tasks, though. However, we have added the task functionality in since then. So we do use Sahana for task management. And one of the things we've been discussing for some time is actually using Sahana to manage like tickets and tasks within the Sahana Software Foundation. Actually, at AIQ, we eat our own dog food, and we use an instance of Sahana to manage our tasks. We haven't implemented any Gantt chart functionality yet within Sahana, but it would certainly be a valuable feature, and if someone was interested in doing that, I'd be really keen in talking to them further about how that could be done. Any other questions? Great. Let's go on and talk about Git and GitHub. Hopefully many of you already know about Git and GitHub. If not, and if you're a developer, it's something you should know about. These are tools for version control and to help review and contribute code. So the trunk of Sahana Eden is at this location here. HTTP github/flavor/Eden. Now, Flavor is the username and the handle of the lead developer of Sahana Eden, Fran Boone, and so he maintains the trunk. You'll also recognize his handle in IRC. He spends a lot of the time there. So to get started with Sahana Eden using Git and GitHub, first of all, you'll have to sign on up for a GitHub account, and then you'll have to install Git on your computer. Now, for some people, get it a new thing, and it takes a bit of time to get your head around. I certainly took a bit of time to get my head around. I've tried to really step through the workflow here in as much detail as possible, but there's a lot of people who are very familiar with it, so if you're struggling to jump on ISC, but hopefully you find it a lot easier than I did. So the first thing you need to do is fork a new repository on GitHub. That creates a fork of Trunk, and it's a place online to store all your code. The next step you'll have to do, and I haven't moved the number, going on to number 2, is to clone a local repository. From your GitHub repository, clone your local repository. Then with the next thing, once you've done that, you're good to go. So from steps 3 to 8 is really what you'll do in your day-to-day routine of contributing to Sahana Eden. So step 3, you'll be making changes to your code. And sometimes you'll be doing multiple commits. Sometimes you might only do one commit. And you can commit it using those instructions there. Then as you're going forward, you probably want to start pulling updates from master. So this is pulling from Trunk. It's rare that more than a few days will go by without a change to Trunk. This is something which is always evolving, we're always developing, we're always endeavoring to make it better. There's a number of people who work on it intensively. So pulling these updates into your local repository. After that, it gets a bit tricky, and this is where if you're having trouble, I really recommend talking to someone on IRC is a great place to look. But this is the process that I follow. So what I do is I create a branch of my local repository. Then I look at the log. Once I've looked at the log, what I do is I roll back. I roll back before all of my changes. What that does is, and I don't need to worry about that because I made the branch which has preserved all of my changes. Once I've basically got rid of all of my changes from my local repository, the master branch, I pull from the trunk, so I make sure I've got the latest code. Then I use a handy function called cherry pick. So you cherry pick your commits. So you put those on top, and then you rebase them. So you combine them into a single commit. Now this is really helpful if you've maybe done a number of commits. It just puts it all together so only one commit needs to be reviewed. So after you've done that, you can push your code to GitHub. And then you can do a pull request to Trunk. So this sends a message to Fran, who maintains the Trunk, to say, hey, I've got some changes here. Can you check them out and see if they're good to merge into Trunk? So, are there any questions? Because I'm sure there are. But what I'd really say is have a look at the instructions on the wiki. There's a more detailed instructions there. And hopefully that will answer a lot of your questions. But are there any questions now that any of you may have while you've got me on the line?
We can come back, I think, because we're almost at the end of our plan program.
Okay.
So, yeah, think about it if you have any questions and certainly address them.
So this is that's the bulk of the technical content we wanted to go through. Now we just want to talk about steps moving forward. There are a lot of resources, and this has really been sort of a brief overview of a link fest of where you can go for more information. So one of the key goals here has been to really indicate that there is a lot of more information out there. There's the wiki, which is a great place to look. What I find myself doing a lot of the time is looking at the title of the next page of the wiki, and that gives me a list of all the pages in the wiki. So that's where I often search for pages. And there's also the Sahana Eden book. So just one more note on the wiki. Because there is a lot of documentation, it's an ongoing effort to keep it up to date. And we endeavor to do our best, but we don't always succeed. It's a voluntary community, and we're trying to do our best, and sometimes documentation is one of the things that slips by the wayside. If you do see that there's gaps and you know how to fill them, it's a wiki. Please update it. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Worst case scenario, we can always roll back to a newer version. But in any case, if you're updating a page, it indicates that there's something that needs to be updated. And all of you will provide a much better perspective than us who've been working on this for years. So you'll know where there's gaps. Also, if there's something that you can't find on the wiki, feel free to ask the mailing list, which I'll give you a link to soon. And if you get an answer from the mailing list and you think you can put that information on the wiki so the next person who comes along doesn't have to update and ask the mailing list, please do that. That would be really helpful. That's one great way of contributing. So there's a Sahana Even book, which is something we worked on, sponsored by Google some years ago now, but it's more consolidated content. Including some of those tutorials I mentioned. So I'd really encourage you to look at it. You can look at a copy online. You can even buy your own copy for, I think, a small fee of $10, including postage and packaging. No, not including postage and packaging. But, yeah, so that's something to look at. There's also the Web2Py book, which is another resource. As I said, Sahana Even's built on top of Web2Py. I often find myself referring back to this book, particularly the data abstraction layer, so we use a lot of the data abstraction layer features of Web2Py. And we really hope that you'll contribute. You'll hope that you'll engage with Sahana Even and the Sahana projects. There's a couple of pages of how you can contribute code. There's a page of how you can contribute code. If you're looking to deploy Sahana within your own organization, what I'd really encourage you to do is start with a deployment page. And I'm about to just put up a rough template for how you can lay that out. This helps us understand what you're trying to do, and it really helps us be able to better support you and point you in the right direction of how you can use Sahana. Likewise, if you're interested in developing new features such as the Gantt chart, we'd encourage you to put together a blueprint outlining what you think that feature would look like, how it would work, what it would do. That will allow us to sort of point in the right direction once again of how that can integrate with the framework. It's best if we can integrate with the framework as much as possible so that there's consistency within the code base, making it easier to maintain going into the future. But also so that it's easier for you to implement. We don't want you to have to be reinventing the wheel when there's a lot of functionality that you could use already. Finally, we really hope that you'll keep in touch. We've got a really active mailing list, and it's done through Google Groups there, as well as an active IRC chat. Finally, we do have community calls, and there will be one being organized next week, and we'll make sure the announcement goes out to all of you as well as it always goes out to the mailing list. So that's really all we had to cover today. So that open the floor for some time for some Q&A for any of you really to go ahead and ask any questions that you may have. I will close down my full screen and have a look at the chat window. So,
yeah. And before we do that, actually, Devin, if you were there, I assume you're calling user 3, so I'm going to unmute you. You'd like to speak for a few minutes about the NYC Prepared project.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Thank you.
Hi.
Free.
I feel like I'm on the radio. Okay, so I'm here with 4 other folks in New York, where we have deployed Sahana Eden first, kind of under the Occupy stand, with Occupy standing being like a primary user. Now our deployment is getting updated and adopted by a variety of long-term recovery groups that have spun up after Sandy. So the long-term recovery groups are basically coalition organizations in each of the 5 boroughs of New York that help local community-based organizations as well as bigger BOAD players like coordinate in general. So we're working on, we're basically providing them with websites, with training, how to use simple technologies like WordPress and Google Drive to, get them productive. Is that a chip?
Sounds like it.
Yeah, I'm jealous. Get them being productive, using like basic online tools, and also making accessible like much more high-end tools than most of these community organizations have had access to. Eden's one of them, and I think Eden's kind of like the backbone of what we hope to make accessible to these 300 like organizations in New York. We're also providing like basically as many WordPresses as people want that aggregate news and event feeds. So that there's kind of a centrally curated news and event portal for the disaster relief and resilience community in New York. We're providing a data repository, a CCAN installation, and a knowledge base wiki. And that's kind of our objective over the next 3 months, which is to make all those tools accessible, to introduce Sahana to these 300-ish organizations, and to iterate collaboratively with them on the Sahana system so that it becomes more and more useful for them. We kind of see Sandy as an opportunity to upgrade the technical infrastructure of the nonprofit sector in New York City in general. The basic premise being like, no matter whether there's a disaster or not, it makes sense for nonprofits to have a directory of each other's information. It makes sense for them to have the ability to map data together and to map their facilities and to manage inventory in their facilities and to perform, and to like manage assets, shared assets together. Things that Sahana can provide are just like could be just really useful for the nonprofit sector, and it's a big sector. So that's kind of our work. So like I said, over the next 3 months, we're going to be making these tools accessible, and ideally we'll be integrating additional tools like crisis cleanup, which is another open source Python-based application for tracking mapping work orders, as well as engaging with a mobile app developer who kind of like created a cool interface for mobile app disaster relief apps, but like never found a database wherein that data could be made actionable. So, we're basically, we're maintaining a deployment here. If folks are interested in like the deployment and maintenance side of Sahana Eden, which is a lot of like usability stuff, a lot of like changing this field and that field, and kind of just like exploring what it's like to like manage deployment for, a bunch of stakeholders in a real life place. And we would love folks. I'd love people's help in doing that. It's kind of it. I'd be happy to answer questions if folks have questions.
No, it's great. I think is there a place where people can go get in contact with you in the group or
yeah, so I mean,
we will put up a page on our own website to direct people to the project as well, but for now.
Yeah, so we're basically kicking off the project. The project's kind of been happening kind of discreetly and slowly as we basically built the long-term recovery various groups websites. So we're kind of the tech provider of choice for them. So they'll so we're in a good place. But if people go to the project will basically kick off next week officially. But if people go to nycprepared.org now, they'll get a bunch of information, some of which is outdated and most of which is not designed. But if you go, especially if you folks go to nycprepared.org/tools, they'll see a kind of like a diagram of like what the plan is for the next 3 months. And if folks want to reach out to me personally, I mean, there's contact forms throughout NYC Prepared, but if folks want to email me, they can email me at devin@nycprepared.org. And I would be, I'll walk folks through this. Yeah.
Okay, great. Are there any questions about that or any of the technical training? Michael, you with us?
I'm still with you. So yeah, I would just say the floor is really now open. That's the content that we had prepared, and although I said it was going to be sort of not very participative, we did want to make sure that there was some time at the end to answer any questions. This might be an opportunity for you to start following through those slides, and going through some of the exercises or tutorials, installing Sahana Eden, getting started, and just you've got us as an open audience, and just any other questions that you may have in mind of how to get engaged and start contributing to Sahana.
Michael, this is Luisa. Hello?
Hi, Luisa.
This is a great training. This is fantastic. I hope that, I know it's being recorded. The audio was not very good for me. I hope the audio comes through. I think this would be fantastic to use for GHC. I have a couple of questions that weren't picked up in the training. Do you recommend for GHC that we ask the people to use the virtual machine or download and install?
I think it really comes down to timing. If people are coming there on the day, it can take, depending on how many people there are. I mean, if you're going through just on your own and you know what you're doing, you can get an instance installed in probably under half an hour. But if there's a lot of people, a lot of different machines, it can take a lot of time to do that. So that's where the VirtualBox, it's a known quantity, it's a known environment. But the ideal would be that people who are going to be there install their own development environment prior to the event.
So I tried installing the virtual machine today, and so I tried to do the two pulls from Git, and the first pull gave me an error. The second one did pull down everything.
Okay. Could you paste the error into the chat number?
I'll try it again. No, because I closed the. I'll just send it around. I don't have it right now. I just closed my box.
I'm not quite sure what it should be, though.
So the first command is git pull. The origin pull was fine, but not the other pull. Let me.
Okay, I'm not actually familiar with that, but maybe if you could, what I just suggest is if you could take that, if you could just take that and email it to the Sahana email list, or jump on IRC.
So my question actually is whether other people here had problems with the virtual machine installation or not. So it was the git pull upstream master that gave me an error saying it couldn't connect. But could you ask if there were others today who were able to install the virtual machine okay?
Sure. Were there others?
Okay, I guess not.
According to Pat, she said GitHub path is likely changed. Web2 probably changed its organization name on GitHub. Pat, I know from the message I'm unmuting you, was updating this today, so I don't know, what the status is. I don't think Michael has looked at those messages that went out.
Okay, so I think there is a problem. I tried to download the virtual machine about 30 minutes before the presentation, and it was from 2012, so it was an older version. So there were problems. So that does need to be fixed before Saturday.
Okay, so I would say at this stage maybe we'll just put some comments on the wiki as yet, just to avoid the virtual machine and just focus on doing either the install from the either the Windows install or the Linux script, or just doing the manual install. And just as many people who are coming to GHC is to just make sure that they've installed Sahana even prior to that. The other note Pat has just mentioned here is that the new version is much larger.
Right.
And I think that's in excess of a gigabyte, so that's quite a considerable download. Because that's a whole virtual machine image. So are there any other questions about anything else we've covered in today's training? Or anything that people are curious about? So Mark, is there anything else you wanted to go over? Because
not really. I think we can wrap this up.
yeah, I would just offer. I'm happy to stay on the line if anyone has anything they'd like to discuss, or would like to talk about informally, or even if you just wanted to talk through anything you're trying to do, or to have maybe some specific help installing Sahana yourself. I'm really happy to stick around for the next half hour to support that. Otherwise, I'd really say the channels are on to the Sahana Eden mailing list or the Sahana Eden IRC page, and should have the links for both of those. And I think otherwise, I think Mark's put up the slide. Thank you very much for attending. There's a evaluation form that was put together. Would really appreciate any feedback on that evaluation form. We just want to know how the training was for you, whether it met your expectations, and really if there are things that you could suggest on how we can improve this training. But failing that, I think we'll wrap up the formal part of this meeting, and I'll just stay here on the WebEx and really happy to answer any of your questions. So thank you very much.